everyone, and welcome to a new episode from our podcast Land Talks, brought to you by the G20 Global Land Initiative. I am very happy to have Dr. Charles McNeil with me today. Dr. Charles, it's such a pleasure to have you here in our podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Would you please give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yes, I've spent 32 years working with the United Nations, UNDP and UNEP. And my first assignment was the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 when 3 conventions were created, one on biodiversity, climate change, and desertification. Recognizing that these interconnected crises of biodiversity, climate and land, when you have interconnected crises, they require interconnected solutions. I was invited by the G20 Global Land Initiative to help advise on how religious leaders and faith communities can be introduced to this all-important land degradation issue. And I've been struck by the fact that 15 million square kilometers of land has degraded around the world. That's the size of Antarctica, the size of almost Russia, and that 1 million more kilometers squared are degraded each year. And this huge challenge needs to be addressed. It's undermining the Earth's capacity to sustain humanity. It's driving hunger, migration, and conflict. And I'm glad to be able to get educated on this issue and work more on it.
Impressive. So, talking about interfaith and environmental action, and as founder of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, known as IRI, how do you see the role of faith-based leadership in tackling tropical deforestation? And can you share a success story from this initiative?
Yes. You know, for many, many years, we scientists and the UN and government and NGOs have realized that tropical forest deforestation is really key, that without solving that issue, we can't solve the climate issue or the biodiversity crisis or the land crisis for that matter, that we've been working hard for decades and decades and really not making sufficient progress, that if tropical deforestation were a country, it emits more greenhouse gases than the entire European Union, that it releases more emissions than the whole transport sector, all the cars and planes and trains and ships. It's the source of tremendous biodiversity loss. So we've been working hard on that issue, and we realized that unless we build the constituency, build a group of people to take that issue on, that we're not going to solve the problem. So that's why we've reached out to faith communities. It's estimated that 84% of all humankind associate with one religion or another. And these religious leaders have tremendous moral authority, economic power, political power. And we've been astonished and impressed at how open religious leaders around the world have been to stopping the loss of these iconic historic forests, these tropical forests. So we've been working hard over the last 7 years and seeing great success among these religious communities. For example, in Colombia, the IRI, Interfaith Rainforest Initiative leaders have been very creative, working with the national government to integrate commitments to stop tropical deforestation, particularly of the Amazon. Once they had commitments at the national level, they identified the hotspots where the deforestation rate is the highest. And there they've established local Interfaith Rainforest Initiative coalitions of religious leaders and indigenous leaders. And in those places, they've participated in the elections of local mayors and governors and convened them to get their commitment before the election to protect the Amazon. And once the election happened, they went back to the winning mayors and governors and said, okay, let's work together. And they're having a very powerful collaboration, emphasizing, prioritizing protecting forests and indigenous people's rights. So that's a very exciting example. They've trained over 14,000 religious leaders. Millions of people have been educated through radio and TV and social media. So that's an example. And that's happening also in Brazil, Peru, Indonesia, and Democratic Republic of Congo. These 5 countries comprise 70% of all the remaining tropical forests. So that's just one example I'd like to share.
I love that. So, talking about success stories, this will lead us to the local and global impact of the IRI. The IRI bridges local, national, and global efforts. How do you ensure that local voices, particularly from indigenous communities, are heard and reflected in global policy making?
That's such an important question. Thank you for that. In fact, it's been well known for some time, and the evidence is building and growing that the most effective way to protect tropical forests, or any land for that matter, is to protect the rights, to give the rights to the land to the indigenous peoples. That indigenous peoples historically for thousands of years have been stewarding these lands in the most sustainable way. That it's known that land under indigenous people management have the lowest rate of greenhouse gas emissions, the lowest rate of forest loss, the highest biodiversity protection, the best water protection. So indigenous peoples are key. They've been underappreciated for centuries, and now I think what we're seeing through the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative is a renewed appreciation and respect for their cultures, for their spirituality. And what I've seen the most encouraging development is to see that this relationship between religious leaders and indigenous leaders is healing after 500 years of a difficult, oppressive relationship, that religious leaders are now appreciating the role of indigenous peoples. And so they're able to now work together powerfully in these 5 countries. It's the most encouraging development that I've seen, and it's happening at the global level, the national level, and the local level. So thank you for that question. That relationship, that honoring of empowering of indigenous peoples is absolutely central, key to any success in protecting tropical forests, the homes of indigenous peoples.
That's really important to know. Thank you so much for this valuable input. So let's talk a little bit about faith and land. What unique strengths do faith-based organizations bring to environmental conservation? How can these be scaled to address challenges like land degradation? And how can we take advantage of this opportunity with faith?
Another incredibly important question. I really appreciate it. That I've seen with my own eyes that faith leaders and religious communities can have a tremendous impact on a crisis like tropical deforestation. I believe that the same could be said of land degradation. I believe that religious leaders and faith communities could take on land restoration initiatives. And thanks to the G20 Global Land Initiative, they have commissioned a stocktake of what religious leaders and faith communities are doing on land degradation and restoration around the world. There's a lot going on already that it's very encouraging, but I think there's an even bigger opportunity that there are recommendations that have come out of the stocktake commissioned by the G20 Global Land Initiative, and these recommendations make a case for why further investment in inviting religious leaders of all faiths to come together to be educated about the huge potential of land restoration to address the triple crisis that we're facing. So I see a tremendous opportunity here, and religious leaders and faith communities could play a critical role in that.
Of course, of course. My final question for you is, what are global challenges for land that are underappreciated or not receiving sufficient attention?
Yes, there are 2 major issues that I'd like to raise here. One is the impacts of a failed food system. Our global food system is broken. It's producing nearly a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. It's the primary threat to biodiversity, driving the extinction crisis that we're facing. Agriculture is also driving 90% of tropical deforestation. It's responsible for 70% of all freshwater withdrawals, and it's causing hunger for 800 million people around the world. So this broken food system is really putting tremendous pressure on the land, and it needs attention, that there are solutions. We need more sustainable food production. We need to reduce the 30 or 40% of wasted and lost food, and we need to shift our diets, especially in the north, where we need to reduce the amount of animal protein that we're consuming and increase the plant protein, which will have tremendous benefits for human health and for the global environment. So I'm seeing that religious leaders could make a large contribution to transforming the food system, and I look forward to that. That's one that needs more and more attention. The second are these what are called environmentally harmful subsidies or perverse subsidies. Believe it or not, that public money is going to the agriculture sector, the fisheries sector, to forests, to water, to actually undermine, to damage our environment. It's literally estimated to be $7 trillion a year. We're financing environmental harm with public money when only, for example, $200 billion a year is going to nature-based solutions to solve the problem. So until we start to invest more money in solving the problem, then we're paying to really cause this environmental harm that we have a problem. People often say there's not enough money to solve the climate, land, and biodiversity crisis. I think there is enough money. It's just being spent in the wrong places. So if we can reprioritize this matter so that we're actually publicly and privately funding the protection of the land, biodiversity, and climate instead of degrading it, that we have a way forward. And again, I think religious leaders and faith communities can be extremely helpful in this particular endeavor. So those are two issues that I think need further attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles McNeil. I would like this conversation to be endless, but unfortunately, we came to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for more podcasts from Land Talks.